What's up, Perichoresis? Welcome to the Daily Dance. This is part 2 of this brand new series called The Movement. Now, yesterday we talked about perichoresis and the vision and the mission of perichoresis, but I didn't tell you why we call these daily little videos the Daily Dance. The reason we call them the Daily Dance is because, as we said, perichoresis literally means to dance with God. Like, we are invited to dance and be in rhythm and in movement and direction with God. And so the whole vision and the purpose of these little videos is just to carve out a few minutes of your life, a few minutes in the regular rhythm and movement of your life, to give you some space to think about your walk with God, your relationship with God, how you're moving with God, but then also, like, how are you going to continue to move with God? What is it that God is doing in you and around you for you to join Him in what He's doing? So the whole point of these videos is just to carve out a few minutes of your life to think about God and your relationship and walk with Him, hence the Daily Dance. So with that in mind, we're starting this brand new series called The Movement. I think it's appropriate for us to think about, like, the word movement, like, what does it actually even mean? So I looked it up. When you Google it, movement means an act of change. Or another definition of movement would be a group of people working together to advance change. When we think about church, and as we said yesterday, church ultimately began as a movement. And if your church and if your community, if church, when you think of church, if it's not moving, then I'm sorry, but the church is doing it wrong. Like, there has to be movement within church. When we think about church and we think about Christianity as a movement, it is all deeply rooted. It only makes sense. These people were willing to change themselves and change the world only because of Jesus. But when we think about it, it's really a movement that never should have started. There's an essay that was written in 1929, and this essay was based on a sermon that was preached, and it's called One Solitary Life. And these are just some ideas from this sermon that kind of brings to mind the reality that this movement actually never should have happened. Here are some thoughts from One Solitary Life. This movement, Christianity, it's based on a man who was born in an obscure little village, like in a cave. The child of a peasant woman, he grew up in the ghetto, worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. He was an itinerant preacher for 3 years. He never owned his own home. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never even had his own family. He never went to college. He never led a battle. He never put his foot inside even a big city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born. He never did one of these things that usually accompany greatness. He had no credential but himself. While still a young man, the tide of popular opinion turned against him. His friends ran away from him. One even denied him. He was turned over to his enemies. He went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed upon a cross between two major criminals. While he was dying, his executioners gambled for the only piece of property he had on earth, his coat. When he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. And all of this, but yet 2,000 years later, he is the centerpiece of the human race and leader of the column of progress. All the armies that have ever marched, all the navies ever built, all the parliaments that have ever sat, and all the kings that have ever reigned, put together, have not affected the life of humanity upon this earth as powerfully as has this one solitary man, Jesus. When we think about it, Christianity as a movement never actually should have happened. But that's the thing with movements. When all the odds are stacked against it, when there's something deep and powerful and authentic within, that is the motivation. When there is unity with a shared passion to make a big change, that's when movements make the biggest impact. In Acts 1:3, it says how Jesus showed up for 40 days after he rose from the grave. And it specifically says that he's walking around talking to people, showing up in their lives from time to time. And here's my question for you, wherever you go to school, whatever grade you're in, does Jesus show up in your life from time to time? And maybe some of you are thinking, yeah, he just showed up, like maybe right now, like thinking about these things, he's showing up and he's speaking to you, maybe. Maybe for some of you, you're thinking, man, I have asked God to show up, but he just doesn't. So maybe in Acts, he showed up in their life from time to time, but he really doesn't seem to show up in my life. And maybe that's where some of you are. May today, we approach the day with eyes and ears to recognize this Jesus showing up in our life.